Ethan Caldwell, a millionaire used to controlling everything, makes a cold deal with Emily Hayes, a cleaner struggling to survive. She will carry his child in exchange for financial security. But what starts as an impersonal transaction soon challenges both to confront feelings and choices that could change their lives forever. Ethan Caldwell's mansion was the exact portrait of his personality: grand, impassive, and cold. From the immense windows of his office, the view of Seattle reflected the glow of dawn, but the internal atmosphere remained heavy. Ethan sat in his black leather chair, his jaw tense, as his eyes scanned the medical results in front of him. On the other side of the table, the doctor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the relentless silence. "Mr. Caldwell," he began cautiously, "the tests have confirmed the diagnosis. Your chances of natural conception are non-existent." Ethan slowly raised his gaze, his expression like a steel wall. "I'm not interested in limitations. I'm interested in solutions. There are alternatives," the doctor continued, avoiding the billionaire's gaze. "Surrogacy, in vitro fertilization with egg donors. Alternatives that do not include my DNA," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. "Unacceptable." The doctor hesitated, weighing his words. "These options would be the most viable, sir, considering the situation." Ethan slammed the folder shut. "Find another way. You have a week." Later that day, Ethan met with his trusted lawyer, Marcus Whitman. "You want to hire a woman to bear your child?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "I need an heir, Marcus," Ethan corrected coldly. "And I want to avoid any external genetic interference. My legacy depends on it." "And what about the ethical complications?" Marcus insisted. "We're talking about a human life, Ethan. It's not just a contract." "To me, it is," he replied. "Make sure it's foolproof. Find someone suitable, discreet, with no legal issues, and motivated by the right amount." Marcus sighed, already familiar with Ethan's relentless pattern. "And what if things get out of control? If feelings are involved?" "There won't be," Ethan answered, categorical. "Control is my job." That night, as he looked out at the illuminated city, Ethan did not allow himself to reflect on the emotional implications of his decision. To him, everything was simple: business and legacy. Human connections, in his view, only complicated matters. The endless corridors of the Caldwell mansion always seemed intimidating to Emily Hayes. As a cleaner, she had access to the most private areas of the house, but she never felt part of that environment. Each step was taken with care, and each task was completed with almost mechanical precision. That afternoon, Emily was in the kitchen, scrubbing the impeccably polished floor, when the intercom echoed with the authoritative voice of Ethan Caldwell. "Emily Hayes, in my office, now." The sound made her heart race. Ethan rarely spoke to her directly. Wiping her hands on her apron, she made her way to the office, gently knocking on the door before hearing the short command, "Come in." Emily entered, her head slightly bowed. Ethan was sitting behind his immense desk, the evening light outlining his imposing silhouette. He stared at her for a moment that felt like an eternity. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. Not understanding the reason for the summons, Emily complied, feeling her discomfort grow. "I've done some digging into you," Ethan began, straightforward. "Your financial records, your mother's medical expenses, your growing debts. You're in a delicate situation." Emily felt her face flush with indignation. "With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, my personal life is none of your business." "Now it is," he retorted, impassive. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan interrupted her. "I have a proposal," he said, leaning forward. "One that will solve all your problems." Emily crossed her arms, skeptical. "What kind of proposal?" Ethan took a deep breath, as if carefully choosing his words. "I will pay off your debts, cover all your mother's medical expenses, and ensure your education. In exchange, you will carry my child." The room fell into absolute silence. Emily blinked, incredulous. "Sorry, what?" "You heard me right," he confirmed. "It will be a simple contract. You will have full financial support during and after the pregnancy, and, in the end, you will go on with your life with financial freedom." Emily stood up, shaking her head. "This is insane." I am not an incubator for your plans, Mr. Caldwell. I chose you because I believe you understand what need is, he continued, not losing control. You are in a vulnerable position, and this is an opportunity to change your life. Emily felt anger boiling inside her. I need time to think, she said with effort. 3 days, Ethan replied curtly. After that, my offer will be made to someone else. In the following days, Emily struggled with a whirlwind of emotions. The proposal seemed absurd, but the weight of the debts, the fear of losing her mother, and the frustrations of a life without prospects consumed her. On the third night, after hours of insomnia, she picked up the phone and dialed the number Ethan had left. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice trembling. I accept. Great, he replied, emotionless. Prepare to move tomorrow. Emily's move to Ethan Caldwell's mansion was quick and meticulously organized. The day after her decision, an extensive contract was placed before her. Lawyers explained each clause with legal precision, while Ethan watched closely, ensuring she understood the limits and obligations of the agreement. Despite the luxurious room in the east wing of the mansion, Emily felt more like a prisoner than a guest. The morning after the move, Ethan summoned her to his office. She entered, noticing the same folder open on the table. Emily, he began, straightforward, now that the contract has been signed, I want to make it clear that every aspect of this situation will be treated with the utmost seriousness. I understand, she replied tersely. I've already noticed that you're good at being controlling. That's not control, Ethan countered, ignoring the sarcasm. It's efficiency. From today on, your diet will be supervised by a nutritionist. There will be weekly medical consultations, and whenever you leave the mansion, you will be accompanied by security. There will be no exceptions. Emily crossed her arms defiantly. So, I'm under constant surveillance? I didn't know being pregnant meant losing my freedom. This is for your safety and the baby's, Ethan stated. Nothing personal? Nothing about this is personal, is it? Emily shot back. Do you really believe you can turn this into a simple business deal without any emotional consequences? Ethan maintained his rigid posture. I am efficient. Sentimentality does not interest me. Emily felt her anger rising but held it in. If you don't want this to be personal, Mr. Caldwell, I suggest you learn to deal with people as human beings. Because right now, you're acting like a machine. Machines don't make mistakes, he replied, impassive. In the following days, Emily adjusted to the new routine. Despite the constant supervision and numerous rules, she found small moments of relief, like the daily calls with her mother or the time spent in the garden. One day, while trying to sneak a piece of cake in the kitchen, Ethan suddenly walked in. That's on the restricted list, he said, his voice firm. Emily rolled her eyes, slamming the fork down on the counter. Do you think you can control every aspect of my life? I'm not a robot to follow your perfect rules, Ethan. Ethan crossed his arms, cold as ever. I am financing your entire life. You agreed to this. Momentary feelings have no place here. Maybe it would be good for you to learn what feelings are, Emily retorted, leaving the kitchen with firm steps. Despite the constant friction, the relationship between the two began to change subtly. Ethan started attending some medical consultations, always justifying his presence as part of his control of the process. However, during one of those consultations, something unexpected happened. During the ultrasound, the sound of the baby's heartbeat echoed through the room. Emily, lying on the examination table, turned her face to Ethan, expecting to see the same indifference as always. To her surprise, for a brief moment, she noticed a glimmer of surprise in his eyes. It's a strong and healthy sound, the doctor commented, smiling. Is it normal? Ethan asked, his voice lower than usual. Completely, the doctor replied. Emily chuckled softly. Looks like the air is doing well, doesn't it? Ethan didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the monitor screen, as if processing something new. Back at the mansion, Ethan isolated himself in his office. He tried to dive into work, but the sound of the baby's heartbeat wouldn't leave his mind. For the first time, he felt that something in his calculated approach might be changing, something he still didn't know how to explain. The pregnancy was progressing, and although the routine at the Caldwell mansion remained meticulously planned, something was beginning to change. Ethan, who had been distant before, was now keen on attending all the medical appointments and occasionally checking in on how Emily was feeling. He justified his actions as necessary to maintain control, but Emily was starting to notice cracks in his cold demeanor. One night she was in the mansion's garden, enjoying the fresh air after an exhausting day. Sitting on a wooden bench, she gazed at the starry sky when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Ethan. "Are you always wandering around, or is this just stalking?" Emily joked without looking at him. "I was checking the security of the property," he replied hesitantly. "I saw you here and thought I should check on how you are." She chuckled softly but with irony. "Now you care about that? Interesting." Ethan ignored the comment and sat down beside her, something she never expected. The silence between them was uncomfortable, but charged with something Emily couldn't explain. "How are you?" he finally asked. Emily looked at him, surprised. "Really? Tired, overwhelmed. Sometimes I feel like I'm carrying a weight greater than just this baby. You can tell me if something needs to be adjusted," he said, his voice a bit softer. "I want to make sure everything is as expected." She sighed, shaking her head. "Ethan, you can't measure this with graphs or spreadsheets. It's not just the baby. It's everything. The changes, what I've left behind, and what awaits me after this." Ethan fell silent, seeming to absorb her words. Finally, he spoke. "I never considered these things before. For me, everything has always been straightforward. I solve problems with logic and resources, but I realize that doesn't work with people." Emily laughed, but without humor. "What a great discovery, Mr. Caldwell." "I know I'm not easy," he admitted, looking away, "but I'm trying to understand." She looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. For the first time, he seemed more human. "Well," she said softly, "starting to understand is already something." The following days brought unexpected moments. Ethan began to show small changes. He helped Emily walk through the garden when she seemed tired, asked about her mother during dinners, and on one occasion, even offered to carry bags she had bought during a rare outing. But the most striking transformation happened during another medical appointment. During the ultrasound at 6 months, the doctor pointed at the screen. "Do you see this? The baby is moving very well. Do you want to feel?" Emily reached out and touched her belly with a smile. To her surprise, Ethan hesitated, but eventually placed his hand next to hers. When he felt the baby move, his face for a moment became completely disarmed. "This is," he started but stopped, unable to find the words. Emily watched the scene, realizing that for the first time, Ethan was feeling something he couldn't control, something that unsettled him and perhaps transformed him. Later that night, Ethan isolated himself in his office again. He looked at the stack of documents on his desk, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew he was changing, and for the first time it didn't terrify him. The early morning was dark and silent, as it always was in the Caldwell mansion, until a scream broke the calm. Emily had gone into labor. Doctors and nurses hired by Ethan rushed through the hallways, turning the medical wing of the house into a scene of urgency and tension. Ethan stood in the hallway, his expression tense. Despite his rigid posture, he clenched his hands tightly, battling an anxiety he had never felt before. "Mr. Caldwell," one of the doctors said as he exited the room, "the situation is under control, but the process may take some time." Ethan nodded, unable to say anything. He hated the feeling of helplessness. At that moment, the control he had always had over everything seemed irrelevant. Hours later, the silence was broken by the sound that would change everything, the cry of a baby. Ethan froze, his eyes fixed on the door of the room. When the nurse came out, carrying the newborn in her arms, he took a hesitant step forward. "It's a boy," she said with a smile. "He is healthy and strong." Ethan looked at the baby, the small, wrinkled face, the closed eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt something beyond logic and calculation. When the baby was placed in his arms, he realized the symbolic weight of that moment. It was his son, a life he had helped create. "He's so small," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily, lying in bed, exhausted but smiling, watched the scene. "Welcome to the world of humans, Ethan." Ethan didn't respond. He was lost in the moment, unable to process the avalanche of emotions. Finally, he sat down next to Emily, still holding Henry carefully. I thought he was just an heir, Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. But he is so much more than that. Emily smiled, her words heavy with fatigue and sincerity. He is your son, Ethan, and that changes everything. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Genuine regret. Emily, I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you. You deserved more. Emily blinked, surprised. Are you apologizing? Yes, he replied, his voice firm but laden with emotion. I know words are not enough, but I will prove that I want to make this right, not out of obligation, but because it's what you both deserve. Emily did not respond immediately. There was a long way to go, but in that moment, something had changed between them. Later, alone in his office, Ethan looked out the window as the sound of Henry's cries echoed through the house. He felt something he had never experienced before, the weight and beauty of being vulnerable. The Caldwell mansion seemed different in the weeks following Henry's birth. The sound of the baby's cries, once unthinkable in such a cold and methodical environment, now filled the hallways. Even in moments of tension, like sleepless nights or routine medical checkups, there was a new energy that transformed the place. Ethan began to spend more time with Henry, something that Emily noticed with surprise. He was still awkward, lacking the naturalness of someone used to children, but he was making an effort. One morning while Emily was in the living room rocking Henry, Ethan entered carrying a small storybook. Are you reading to him? Emily asked, trying to hide her smile. Ethan stopped, looking uncomfortable. I thought it would be a good idea. He doesn't understand yet, but maybe it helps. Emily genuinely smiled this time. You're trying, Ethan. That means a lot. He sat down next to her, holding the book carefully. It's not as simple as running a business, but I'm learning. Over the weeks, Ethan also began to engage more with Emily. He insisted on taking her out to dinner, away from the mansion, claiming she needed a break. At the restaurant, while Henry was under the care of a trusted babysitter, Ethan seemed like a different man. You never go out, do you? He asked, watching her as she studied the menu. Emily looked up. Not exactly. I think my routine doesn't allow for it. Ethan paused before responding. I want to change that. You should have more time for yourself. I know we still have a lot to sort out, but I want you to feel comfortable, here or anywhere. Emily watched him, trying to understand if he truly believed what he was saying. Why are you doing this now, Ethan? Trying to be different? He took a deep breath. Because I realized I was wrong about everything. About you, about Henry, about what really matters. Emily didn't respond immediately. Despite her caution, it was impossible to ignore that Ethan was trying to be a better father, and perhaps a better person. One afternoon, when they were in the garden, Henry trying to crawl on the grass, Ethan turned to Emily. Do you miss anything? Something I can help bring back? She looked at him, surprised by the question. I think I miss myself sometimes, who I was before all of this started. But I also know that this experience has changed me, for better or for worse. Ethan was silent for a moment before responding. I want you to know that I'm here, Emily, not just for Henry, but for you too. If there's anything I can do to help, just say it. Emily smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. I think you're already starting, Ethan, and that's more than I expected. Although there was still a long way to go, Ethan's small gestures began to create something neither of them anticipated, a true bond. Months passed, and the changes in Ethan Caldwell's life continued to become more evident. He, who had previously centralized all control of the company in his own hands, began to delegate responsibilities to trusted executives. His focus had shifted. Emily and Henry were now the priority. Emily was also growing in this new chapter. With Ethan's financial support, she was able to resume her nursing studies, a dream that had been postponed for years. One morning, while she was reviewing notes at the table in the living room, Ethan walked in carrying Henry in his arms. You're studying a lot, he commented, watching her with a subtle smile. You need a break. Emily looked up and smiled. And who's going to take care of him while I rest? You? Ethan looked at their son, who was babbling something indecipherable. "We'll manage, right, champ?" Emily laughed, a light laugh that had seemed impossible for months. "If you can keep him occupied for an hour, that would be a miracle." "Challenge accepted," Ethan replied with a determined tone. As Emily stepped away to rest, Ethan stayed with Henry, something that had previously seemed unthinkable. He took him to the garden, where they explored the grass and watched the birds. Despite his initially clumsy demeanor, Ethan began to understand the little signs from his son, the babbles that indicated happiness, the grumbles of hunger or tiredness. Later that night, during a quiet dinner at the mansion, Ethan made a revelation. "Emily," he began, placing the cutlery on the table, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how it all started." She looked at him, intrigued. "And what did you think?" "I thought about how I was wrong to treat all of this like a contract," he said sincerely. "You deserve more than that. You deserve more than the rules I imposed. And Henry, he showed me that my vision was wrong. He's not just an heir. He's a part of me that I never knew existed." Emily was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. "You've changed a lot, Ethan, but you still have a lot to prove." "I know," he replied with a humble tone, "and I'm willing to do that, no matter how long it takes. I want you and Henry to know that you are my priority now." The following days brought more evidence of this transformation. Ethan began to dedicate time to the little things, reading stories to Henry before bed, helping Emily with her study tasks, and occasionally even daring to cook something special. One day, Ethan surprised Emily by inviting her to visit the college where she was studying. During the meeting with the director, she discovered that all her financial issues had been resolved. "You did this?" Emily asked, emotional. "It was the least I could do," Ethan replied. "I want you to have the freedom to pursue your dreams." The barriers between them began to slowly dissolve. Despite the hurts of the past, Emily could not deny that Ethan was making an effort to be a better man. And although there were still doubts, she felt that something genuine was growing between them. The sound of Henry's laughter echoed through the park on that sunny afternoon as he took unsteady steps across the grass. Emily was crouched in front of him, her arms outstretched in encouragement, while Ethan watched closely, a proud smile on his face. "Come on, Henry," Emily said enthusiastically. "You can do it." The little one wobbled, but his eyes shone with determination. When he finally reached Emily, he threw himself into her arms, letting out a joyful shout. She hugged him tightly, laughing as she looked at Ethan. "He's walking," she exclaimed, beaming. "He's stubborn," Ethan replied, stepping closer and stroking their son's head. "He definitely got that from me." Emily laughed. "Oh, of course. And his patience is mine then?" Ethan shrugged, feigning innocence, but his smile revealed how much that moment meant to him. Despite all his journey of transformation, nothing seemed as important as being there with Emily and Henry on a simple yet perfect day. In the months that followed, Ethan and Emily continued to build something genuine. He attended her graduation ceremony, proud to see her complete her studies with honors. During the party held at the mansion, Ethan gave a brief speech, something that was not common for him. "Emily," he began, holding a glass of wine, "you've taught me so much more than I could ever imagine. Because of you, I've discovered that there's more to life than legacy or control. You gave me a wonderful son, but more than that, you showed me how it's possible to change, and for that, I am eternally grateful." Emily moved, raised her own glass, but couldn't find the words to respond. The smile on her face said it all. The next day, Ethan prepared a surprise for Emily. He took her to the park where Henry had taken his first steps and set up a small picnic, something simple but carrying a deep meaning. "This is new," Emily said, looking at the blankets spread out on the grass and the carefully arranged plates. "I'm learning," he replied, smiling. As Henry played nearby, Emily and Ethan sat side by side, enjoying the moment. "I know that not everything has been easy," Ethan said, taking her hand, "and I know there are still things to improve, but I want you to know that I'm committed, not just to Henry, but to you as well." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining. "You really have changed, Ethan, and while I still have fears, I can't deny that I believe in you." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I promise I'll keep showing that every day." As the sun set, Painting the sky in golden hues, the three of them were together, like a family that had found its way despite the difficulties. Emily rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling for the first time completely at peace. Ethan looked at her and at Henry, who was now running across the grass and knew he needed nothing more. For the first time in his life, he had everything that truly mattered. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to continue watching.